Let's continue dissecting Neil deGrasse Tyson's Starry Messenger. Not all concepts in this book may be easily accepted. It's best to view Tyson's ideas as a hypothetical concept about the ceiling of human civilization, a logical possibility, or a kind of brainstorming. Logical possibilities may not necessarily have practical feasibility. However, it's best to maintain an open attitude, considering that many behavioral patterns in today's human society would have been difficult for people 100 years ago to accept. Now, let's explore a more radical concept. Letting scientists govern a country. This idea might seem far-fetched, so let me offer a caveat. If Tyson were to debate me on this concept, I would immediately present various counterarguments. For instance, I could cite Hayek. If Hayek were to hear today's interpretations, he would not only oppose but vehemently oppose them. Hayek believed in spontaneous order and strongly opposed any attempt to control society with so-called science, as he believed it would only lead to tyranny and enslavement of the people. Furthermore, American political scientist and anthropologist James C. Scott wrote a book titled, Seeing Like a State. How Certain Schemes to Improve the Human Condition Have Failed, in which he introduced a concept called métis. Métis is localized, practical, hidden knowledge that is difficult to understand through statistical methods and remains invisible to the state. If the government forcefully conducts surveys, it will only obtain distorted information. So, isn't making scientific decisions based on such information absurd? Moreover, we all know that scientific conclusions are not necessarily truths. What if scientists make mistakes? Acknowledging the complexity of society and treating the state as an organic, evolving organism, an emergent system, allowing people to freely experiment with various things, is more in line with the natural order. Tyson didn't mention any of these points, so he certainly doesn't have a particularly compelling argument. But I'd like to speak up for Tyson a bit. Tyson's concept has a Platonic style. Plato wrote a book called The Republic, arguing for his ideal form of government. A government that has never been realized but has profoundly influenced the institutional design of various countries in subsequent generations. When Tyson talks about scientists governing a country, it's not a plan or a manifesto. It's just an idea and a brainstorm. Tyson wants to establish a country governed by scientific principles. This is not a sudden whim of Tyson. In fact, intellectuals have had such dreams. In 2016, a group of public intellectuals and scientists, including celebrities like Richard Dawkins, gathered and someone proposed the idea of forming a virtual country. This country would have no independent territory but would be formed by cities around the world with similar ideologies. Cities like London, Paris, and New York, including states like California and Massachusetts in the United States, and even countries like Switzerland and Denmark, could unite to form a transnational virtual country. This virtual country would have its own laws, implement its own economic, educational, and trade policies, and operate just like a real country. Of course, the cities and states joining wouldn't need to secede from their original countries. They would just become charter cities of their respective countries. Charter cities already exist. This is somewhat similar to what China calls special administrative regions, where they operate relatively independently within their host countries. A&D can even be managed by a corporation. However, currently, no charter city has its own independent judicial system. The initial idea was to call this virtual country, Land of Reason. Tyson felt it wasn't cool enough, so he came up with a name called Rationalia. Tyson proposed that Rationalia's constitution would have only one clause. All policies must be based on evidence. That is, they must have scientific basis. The idea of Rationalia caused a sensation as soon as it was proposed and was widely reported in the media. But all of it was criticism. I don't believe in the feasibility of Rationalia either. But through Tyson's ideal, we can examine how absurd reality can be. The judicial and political systems of modern Western societies are essentially competitive systems. We know that in the past, whoever had the strongest fists made the rules. Now, with democracy, in civilized societies, we can't rely on fists anymore. In principle, decisions are made, based on who is right, who represents the majority. In the past, there was military competition, but now, it's a competition of various forces in debates. For example, the Anglo-American judicial system has inherited the jury system for hundreds of years. Before any trial, a group of ordinary people forms a jury, and lawyers for both the prosecution and defense present evidence to the jury and persuade them. Juries are composed of non-professionals, ordinary people, but they decide guilt or innocence, while professional judges are only responsible for sentencing. In Tyson's view, this system is not at all scientific. It's not about scientific investigation of guilt or innocence. It's about which lawyer can persuade the jury in a debate. In a debate, you don't necessarily stand for the view you believe in. Your position is assigned temporarily. Either guilty or not guilty, black or white. Where's the empirical spirit of investigation in this? Especially in the Anglo-American legal system, emphasis on witnesses over evidence makes it even less reliable. Tyson himself had 3 opportunities to serve on a jury, but because he spoke of scientific thinking and evidence, pointing out biases in the judge's case presentations, he was dismissed by the judges 3 times. Isn't that absurd? The person with the most scientific spirit among them was the one excluded from the jury. If you've seen movies like 12 Angry Men, you'll understand. Juries are too easily misled by various biases in the judgment process. Fact-finding shouldn't be entrusted to ordinary people. It should be entrusted to those who understand science. Of course, this competitive stage isn't only advantageous to the rich, because when poor people sue the rich, they can potentially receive high compensation, and lawyers like to help poor people sue the rich. But this is certainly not a just judicial system. This system completely lacks respect for scientific thinking. The formulation of public policy is similar. The way democracy works, in the United States is through competitive debates between 2 parties. Because both parties have strong biases, whoever gains power will bring bias to public policy. The effectiveness of the democratic system is largely due not to democratic decision-making but to mechanisms such as individual rights protection, democratic checks and balances, and media supervision. We don't need to delve into these details. The key point is that the current Western judicial system and national policies are not evidence-based but debate-based. Tyson's Rationalia specifically addresses evidence. Court judgments should be entirely based on evidence, and any public policy must be supported by convincing evidence. Note that Rationalia does not require everyone to live a scientific life. You have full freedom in your personal life. You can choose your lifestyle and religious beliefs freely, and the government doesn't care. But if you want to turn your ideas into public policy, you must present evidence. For example, if you advocate for national investment in arts education, claiming that art enhances citizens' creativity, then we need to ask: is creativity useful? Can creativity contribute to society? You must first provide evidence in these areas. Once you've proven that creativity contributes to society, you must also demonstrate that art education can indeed enhance citizens' creativity before discussing policy formation. Where does the evidence come from? From scientific research. In Rationalia, various sciences studying human behavior, such as psychology, sociology, neuroscience, anthropology, and economics, would receive substantial funding. Citizens of Rationalia would develop a habit of citing research evidence for everything, and the country would foster a culture of evidence-based decision-making. Even the moral standards that citizens should follow would need to be justified by evidence. The courts in Rationalia are places for rational discussion rather than debate. Courtroom dramas would become dull TV shows, devoid of eloquent lawyer debates, replaced instead by experts presenting evidence in ways that ordinary people might not understand. Of course, there will still be debates in Rationalia, but they will be conducted in the manner of scientists. Previously, we read about a theorem proposed by economist Robert Aumann, which states that two truth seekers can ultimately reach an agreement on any issue they dispute. If a dispute does not end amicably, then someone in the dispute is dishonest. Tyson also quoted a saying, "If a dispute lasts more than 5 minutes, both sides are wrong." Low-level arguments often lead nowhere, but scientists' arguments always yield results. Either you're wrong about me, or I'm wrong about you, or we're both wrong, or we have different perspectives, like blind people feeling different aspects of an elephant. Regardless of the situation, scientists resolve disputes through further investigation and research. We speak with experiments, evidence, and data. Scientific arguments always end peacefully, ultimately reaching a consensus. You might argue that some disputes aren't about ideas but about interests, and you scientists can't do anything about that, right? Resources are limited. Who should get them? This is indeed not a scientific issue. But scientists can turn this zero-sum game into a non-zero-sum game. We can just allocate more resources to you. Tyson says that resources in the universe are infinite for humans. If you lack energy, there's inexhaustible solar energy. If you lack water, there are many freshwater comets in the solar system, and we can extract water from comets. If you lack minerals, there are various metal ores on asteroids. As long as we develop space technology well, space mining will have great potential in the future. So, why bother with these things on Earth? Scientists are a force for peace among humanity. In the 1970s, the United States and the Soviet Union were engaged in a Cold War, targeting nuclear weapons at each other, reaching a critical point, yet the two countries engaged in a series of space cooperation. When astronauts and scientists from both countries met, they got along well, completely ignoring politics. In 1975, the American Apollo and the Soviet Soyuz spacecraft even docked directly in space. Astronauts from both sides shook hands in space and entered each other's spacecraft. In that joint mission, the astronauts from both sides agreed on one political rule. Americans would only speak Russian, and Soviets would only speak English. So, why not hand over the world to scientists? Of course, I must emphasize again that this is just a train of thought, perhaps forming a trend, but definitely not a blueprint. But I also want to say that trends can be very useful. For example, Marxism. The United States is clearly not a Marxist country, but Marxism has brought many things to the United States. Marxism has brought the labor movement to the United States, brought about the 8-hour workday, made capitalists rethink the capitalist system, increased welfare for workers, and provided intellectuals with the impetus to critique society. While the United States did not found its nation on Marxism, Marxist elements are present in American politics. We can completely imagine that elements of Tyson's rational nation will be integrated into the governance of various countries in the future. That's the content for this section. In the next part, we will discuss, "You're not special at all."
If you feel there is value in this, please like, subscribe to this channel, and leave your thoughts or suggestions in the comments section. Let's grow together and read more good books.